Not long ago, I never imagined that such a story would happen to me. My name's Terry, and for the past 6 years, I've been married to a woman named Ella. Now, before you start picturing some fairy tale marriage, let me stop you right there. We were far from perfect, but for the most part, we had what seemed like a decent life together. That all changed about a month ago. Suddenly, Ella started acting different. Her phone practically became an extension of her hand, like she couldn't go 5 minutes without it. Anytime it buzzed, pinged, or rang, she'd jump on it so fast you'd think she just won the lottery. And her expressions? Oh, they gave her away. She'd flash these ridiculous grins, so happy and giddy it made my stomach turn. Then there was her newfound secrecy. Ella had never been subtle, but now she was acting like her phone contained the top-secret codes. The second I walked into the room, she'd snap it shut, hide it under her leg, or angle the screen away like she was shielding classified intel. If that wasn't bad enough, she suddenly started claiming she had tons of work at the office. Late nights, she said. Deadlines, she insisted. But I wasn't buying it. You see, I knew Ella well, maybe too well. Before this shift, the only late nights in her world involved her binge-watching movie on Netflix, usually with a glass of wine and a blanket. I tried to push it out of my mind, tell myself I was overthinking it. After all, we had a nice house, a stable life. Why would she want to ruin any of that? Still, my gut wouldn't let it go. You know that deep, twisting feeling when something's off, even if you can't put your finger on it? Yeah, that feeling became my constant companion. But denial's a funny thing. It lets you ignore what you don't want to see, until you can't anymore. Everything came to a head one evening, right before a short business trip I had planned, just one night a couple of hours away. We were having dinner, chatting about nothing important. But Ella was too happy. Not normal happy. Unnaturally cheerful, like a kid counting down the seconds to Taritma's morning. That's when it hit me. Her excitement didn't make sense. I was the one leaving, but somehow, she looked like she was the one with plans. Later that night, I heard her whispering on the phone, her voice soft and secretive, like a teenager sneaking a forbidden call after bedtime. Ella has never been good at being sneaky, so it didn't take much for me to catch snippets of what she was saying. Tomorrow night's perfect, and, don't worry, we'll have the place to ourselves. That one hit like a punch to the gut. Subtle, right? I barely slept that night. My brain wouldn't stop spinning, rage simmering just beneath the surface. But I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't about to explode and give her time to come up with excuses or erase the evidence. No, I was going to be strategic about this, cold, calculated. If Ella was going to betray me, she wasn't getting off the hook with a few clever lies. I was going to let her hang herself with the truth. The next day, instead of heading out for my trip, I made a call to my boss and told him I needed some personal time. Thankfully, he was understanding and didn't push for details. As soon as I hung up, I headed straight to the electronics store and dropped more money than I cared to admit on surveillance equipment. Hidden cameras, microphones, the whole setup. If Ella thought she was going to pull something while I was gone, she had another thing coming. I spent the next few hours turning our home into a scene straight out of a spy thriller. Every skill I'd ever picked up from movies and crime shows came into play as I carefully placed the cameras and mics. If Ella was planning on sneaking someone into our house, I wasn't just going to know about it. I was going to see it unfold with my own eyes. That I knew exactly where to plant the cameras, strategically and discreetly. The living room, kitchen, bedroom, even the bathroom. Any place she might go with her new special friend. I wasn't just going to sit back and let things happen. I was going to watch it all, every humiliating second. But here's the thing. Simply observing wasn't enough for me. I wanted a little poetic justice. So that night, before my business trip, I volunteered to make dinner. It was the perfect opportunity to lace Ella's meal with the most potent laxatives money could buy. Petty? Sure. But when your wife is plotting to cheat on you under your own roof, the rules go out the window. As we ate, Ella looked like she was on top of the world. Beaming and bubbly, no doubt proud of herself for pulling off this little charade. She shoveled down every bite of food, blissfully unaware of the explosive surprise waiting to kick in. After dinner, I leaned in, kissed her cheek, and grabbed my suitcase. "See you tomorrow night, babe," I said as casually as I could manage. She waved me off with the fake sweetness of a dutiful wife, completely clueless about what was coming. I didn't head to the airport, though. Instead, I checked into a hotel just a few minutes away. From there, I opened my laptop, linked it to the surveillance cameras I'd installed, and settled in to wait. What I saw next, well, let's just say it's not an image I'll forget anytime soon. Watching my wife scramble around the house like a headless chicken, tidying up for her secret rendezvous, was equal parts infuriating and hilarious. Ella was moving with frantic energy, fixing her hair, straightening throw pillows, and slipping into a dress I'd never seen before. A dress she sure as hell hadn't worn for me. I nearly laughed out loud at her nerve. Then, the doorbell rang, and what happened next was comedy gold. From my cozy spot in the hotel, I watched her scurry to the hallway mirror, fluffing her hair one last time, smoothing her dress, and opening the door with the enthusiasm of a teenager meeting her prom date. And who was standing there? Rick. Let me tell you, Rick was no Prince Charming. If I had to describe him, I'd say he looked like a washed-up janitor who hadn't seen the inside of a gym in at least 10 years. A balding, rough-around-the-edges version of Humphrey Bogart. The guy held a cheap bottle of wine, grinning like they were about to share the most romantic night of their lives. It was pathetic. I cracked open a beer, leaned back in my chair, and prepared to enjoy the unfolding disaster. The two of them started talking, laughing awkwardly like teenagers on an uncomfortable first date. It was cringeworthy. Ella tried to play it cool, but then it started, her shifting in her seat, squirming just a little too much. I smirked, knowing exactly what was happening. The laxatives were doing their job. After a few minutes of pretending everything was fine, Ella finally stood up and muttered something about needing the bathroom. And oh, did she need it? I clicked over to the bathroom camera, and there she was, perched on the toilet, her face twisted in pure discomfort. It was poetic, really, a true work of art. Of course, she tried to keep her little trip short. But anyone who's experienced that kind of digestive emergency knows there's no such thing as a quick bathroom break. When she finally returned to Rick, she looked pale and uneasy, though she tried to pretend nothing had happened. Rick, oblivious as ever, leaned closer, clearly hoping to escalate things. And then, bam, she bolted for the bathroom again. I nearly spit out my beer from laughing so hard. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Ella kept coming back, each time looking more embarrassed and defeated than before. Poor Rick, still trying to salvage the night, sat there clueless, swirling his wine and wondering what the hell was going on. They even tried to watch a movie, as if that would reset the mood. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Ella couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes before she had to excuse herself again. By now, Rick had started catching on that something wasn't right. "You okay?" he asked, his tone full of suspicion. Ella, desperate to maintain the illusion, forced a smile. "I'm fine. I must have eaten something weird earlier." "Right, Ella. The imaginary salad you conveniently forgot to have for lunch." It didn't take long for the night to spiral into a total disaster. Rick grew visibly frustrated, clearly annoyed that his romantic evening had been reduced to babysitting someone with a stomach bug. Ella, red-faced and mortified, tried to save face, but the spark had been thoroughly extinguished. Eventually, they started bickering. Rick accused her of being distant, while Ella, trying to hold on to the last shred of her pride, snapped back defensively. Then, after yet another frantic dash to the bathroom, Rick finally hit his limit. He grabbed his jacket, shot her a look of pure annoyance, and walked out without so much as a goodbye. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for the guy. Almost. Watching Ella sit there alone, likely replaying every excruciating detail of the worst night of her life, gave me a kind of satisfaction that's hard to describe. But oh no, the best part hadn't even happened yet. From my hotel room, I continued watching the aftermath unfold, savoring every second like it was the final act of a tragic play. Ella slumped on the couch, phone in hand, frantically texting Rick. Probably some pathetic attempt to explain away the chaos. I wasn't surprised when he didn't respond. Honestly, who could blame the guy? If I were in his shoes, I'd ghost her too. Her frustration was palpable. She tossed her phone onto the couch with a huff, her face a mix of confusion, anger, and embarrassment. I watched as she sat there, simmering, undoubtedly blaming Rick, blaming herself, or maybe even blaming fate. But here's the thing, fate had a name and it was Terry, and I was far from finished. The next afternoon, I came home with a plan as sharp as a dagger. The moment I stepped through the door, Ella sprang to life, her face lighting up like nothing had happened. She pasted on that fake, plastic smile, the same one she probably rehearsed a dozen times in the mirror. "How was your trip?" she chirped, acting all sweet and innocent. I could barely stomach looking at her. "We need to talk," I said flatly, cutting through her performance like a knife through butter. That fake smile evaporated in an instant. She froze, the color draining from her face as she tried to figure out what was coming. "I know what you've been up to, Ella," I began, watching her shoulders tense, her eyes darting like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. She stammered, some weak attempt at denial, but I wasn't about to let her weasel her way out of this. "Don't. Just stop," I said, holding up my hand to silence her. "I've seen everything, the cameras, the tech, your little scheme to bring Rick over while I was gone. I know it all." Her face turned ghostly pale. For a second, I thought she might faint right there in the living room. But then, like a trained actress switching scenes, the waterworks started. Tears streamed down her face as she wailed like a broken record. "Terry, please, it's not what you think," she sobbed, her voice trembling as if she actually expected me to believe her. "I've been so lonely, and we've been so distant. I messed up, but I swear nothing happened. Nothing." I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Nothing happened?" I echoed, shaking my head. "Please, Ella. You spent the entire night glued to the bathroom, and trust me, I made sure of that." Her eyes widened in disbelief, mouth agape, as if she couldn't process what she'd just heard. "Yeah," I added coolly. "Those laxatives I slipped into your dinner? That was me. If you were going to betray me in our home, I made damn sure it wouldn't be a fun night for you." She just sat there, stunned, tears streaking her face, unable to speak. When she finally reached for me, desperation oozing from her every movement, I stepped back, my voice like ice. "Don't even think about touching me," I snapped. "I don't care how sorry you are. You've been lying to me, deceiving me, and now it's over." Ella crumpled onto the couch, her sobs echoing through the room, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, not a shred of compassion. "You have until the end of the week to pack up your things and get out," I said firmly. "If you're still here after that, I'll toss your stuff into the trash. And don't you dare try to guilt me into changing my mind. I've already filed for divorce." The flicker of panic in her eyes told me she knew I wasn't bluffing. "Please, Terry," she begged, her voice cracking under the weight of her desperation. "I was foolish. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I can't lose you." "It's too late for that," I replied coldly, turning my back on her. "You weren't worried about losing me when you let that loser into our lives. Now you get to deal with the consequences." I left her there, crying into the couch cushions, and locked myself in the bedroom. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me into forgiving her, and I damn sure wasn't going to let her gaslight me into thinking we could be repaired. It was over. She knew it. I knew it. And soon the whole world would know it too. But I wasn't done yet. I wish I could tell you that confrontation gave me some peace, but it didn't. I was still boiling with rage, the kind that simmers in your veins no matter how hard you try to shake it. While Ella cried her crocodile tears in the living room, I locked myself away, finalizing the last steps of my plan. Kicking her out and filing for divorce wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done, to know that betraying me came with a price. And as for Rick, oh, he wasn't getting off the hook either. The next morning, I woke up early, well before Ella. From the silence, I figured she'd spent the night in the guest room, probably crying herself to sleep. Did I care? Not in the slightest. I grabbed my phone and made 2 important calls. First, to my lawyer to make sure the divorce papers were squared away. I wanted Ella served by the end of the week, no delays. Then came the second call, one I'd been waiting to make. Rick had a wife. Her name was Beatrix, and she had no clue about her husband's extracurricular activities. Lucky for her, I did. The phone rang a few times before a cheerful voice answered. "Hello," Beatrix said, her tone warm and unsuspecting. She had no idea her entire world was about to change. "Hi, Beatrix," I said, keeping my voice steady and controlled, though my heart was pounding. "I'm Terry, Ella's husband." There was a brief pause on the other end, the kind where you can almost hear the gears turning in someone's head as they process something unexpected. "Oh, Terry. Hi. Is everything okay?" Her voice was cautious, polite, but laced with confusion. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Listen, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I think you deserve to know the truth. Rick's been seeing my wife behind your back. They were planning to meet at our house while I was away for work." The line went silent again. I waited, giving her a moment to absorb what I just said. Finally, her voice came back, softer this time. "Are you sure? I mean, do you have proof?" "Unfortunately, yes," I replied, anger bubbling up again as I thought about everything I'd witnessed. "I have emails, texts, and even footage from my security cameras. If you want, I can send it all to you." When the call ended, I let out a long exhale and glanced toward the guest room, where Ella was still hiding out like a coward, probably hoping I'd cool off or reconsider. Spoiler alert, I wouldn't. Later that afternoon, I met Beatrix at a nearby coffee shop. I had to admit, when she walked in, I was momentarily taken aback. Beatrix was stunning, beautiful in that effortless, graceful way that turned heads without her even trying. It made me wonder how on earth Rick could cheat on her with Ella. My wife wasn't unattractive, sure, but compared to Beatrix, it was like trading a sleek luxury car for a clunky old sedan that barely ran. We sat down, and I handed her everything I'd gathered: screenshots of texts, copies of emails, and yes, even a few video clips. As Beatrix scrolled through the evidence, I watched the devastation creep across her face. Her hands shook slightly, and she kept shaking her head, whispering, "How could he do this? I thought we were happy." For a brief moment, I almost felt guilty for being the messenger. Almost. But Beatrix deserved the truth, and Rick deserved every ounce of what was coming his way. We sat there for a while, talking it through. Beatrix was calm, composed, but I could see the disbelief swimming in her eyes, the cracks starting to show in the foundation of her life. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "I don't know what I'll do yet, but I'm glad I know." Before leaving, we exchanged numbers. Not because I was trying to swoop in and play the hero. Trust me, I wasn't in any kind of savior mood, but because if we were both stuck navigating this dumpster fire of betrayal, we might as well look out for each other. As I walked back to my car, I realized something. This was the final nail in the coffin. Ella's little affair wasn't just a private disaster anymore. She wasn't just losing me. Rick was about to lose his wife too. When Beatrix confronted him, their entire house of cards would come tumbling down, and there wouldn't be a damn thing either of them could do to stop it. But as satisfying as that thought was, something strange happened. Calm settled over me. The anger that had been boiling in my veins for days began to fade. I wasn't furious anymore, I was just done. The truth was out, and now all that was left was to watch the fallout. Ella and Rick had thought they were untouchable, that they could lie and cheat without ever facing consequences. But life had a funny way of making sure karma showed up one way or another. When I got home that evening, Ella was sitting at the kitchen table, slouched and disheveled. She looked like she hadn't slept, her face pale and streaked with faint tear lines. The second she saw me, her eyes widened with desperate hope, like she truly thought I might have calmed down and decided to forgive her. She was delusional. I walked straight to the table, dropped a thick stack of divorce papers in front of her with a loud thud, and said, "You've got 3 days." Her face froze, mouth slightly open as shock replaced the faint hope. "3 days for what?" she croaked. "I'm staying with a friend until you're gone," I said flatly, my tone as cold as steel. If you're still here at the end of the week, I'll call the cops and have you removed. Don't test me, Ella. Her eyes filled with panic, her voice cracking as she sputtered. Terry, wait. Please. Just let me explain. I didn't budge. Explain? What's there to explain? I saw everything, Ella. You lied to me. You planned to cheat on me under my own roof. You've already explained enough. Tears started rolling down her cheeks again, her hands clutching the papers like they were her lifeline. Please, Terry. I made a mistake. I'll fix this. We can fix this. I shook my head slowly, my expression unyielding. It's too late for that. You didn't care about fixing anything when you invited him into our lives. Now you'll face the consequences. I turned my back on her, ignoring her sobs as I grabbed my keys and walked toward the door. You did this, Ella? I said quietly, without turning around. Remember that. And with that, I left her sitting there, broken and sobbing. Maybe once upon a time, her tears would have been enough to sway me. But not now. Not anymore. Ella had made her bed. Now it was time for her to lie in it. We can talk about this, she begged, tears spilling down her cheeks as her voice cracked. I didn't actually sleep with him. We can fix this. Can't we just? I cut her off before she could go any further, my voice cold and unyielding. Don't even go there, Ella. Whether you slept with him or not doesn't matter. You were planning to, and that's more than enough for me. I saw the desperation flicker in her eyes as she opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't done. You've betrayed me, Ella. You destroyed everything we had. And here's the thing. Once trust is gone, it's gone for good. There's no coming back from this. She tried, of course, tried to twist the narrative, to make it seem like she wasn't the villain in all of this. Her words came out frantic, stumbling over themselves in an attempt to soften the blow. But I wasn't listening anymore. I didn't have the patience for her excuses, her tears, or her attempts to rewrite the truth. Without another word, I turned and walked away, her sobs echoing behind me like white noise I refused to hear. My footsteps thudded up the stairs as I headed to the bedroom to pack a bag. It was over, and there was nothing left to say. But just as I was about to leave, I paused in the doorway, glancing back at her with a casual, almost mocking tone. Oh, and by the way, I said, my voice sharp but deceptively calm, I met with Rick's wife today. I showed her everything. The reaction was immediate. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She looked at me, wide-eyed and stunned, as if I'd just driven a dagger straight through her chest. You what? She choked out, her voice trembling with disbelief. Yep, I said, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk pulling at the corner of my lips. Turns out Rick's been feeding her the same lies you've been feeding me. But not anymore. She knows everything now. I wouldn't be surprised if she already has a lawyer lined up. Ella staggered back, one shaky hand reaching out to grip the edge of the table for balance. Her face twisted in horror. Terry, no. You didn't. Why would you do that? This is between us, she sputtered, her voice rising in pitch, half shock, half desperation. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all, at how brazen she was to think she could dictate what came next. Between us, I echoed, my tone dripping with disbelief. Are you serious, Ella? You really think there's still an us after everything you've done? She opened her mouth again, trying to argue, but I wasn't finished. You destroyed our marriage, I said sharply, each word like a nail in the coffin. Now you need to own up to it. Rick's wife deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. I'm not the only one whose life you two decided to wreck. Ella pushed herself up from the table, her hands trembling as she reached toward me like she thought she could fix it all with a touch. But Terry, I love you, she pleaded, her voice thick with tears. I never wanted this. I don't know what I was thinking. Can't we fix this? I shook my head, slowly, firmly, my anger smoldering just beneath the surface. There was something almost pitiful about her now, a hollow version of the woman I used to know. But pity wouldn't save her. You weren't thinking about me at all, were you? I said, my voice quieter now but just as cutting. You were only thinking about yourself and your little affair. You didn't care what this would do to me, to us, or to the life we built together. You made your choice, Ella. Now you get to live with it. I turned away from her without waiting for another word. I didn't need to hear any more lies, any more pleas. As I walked out of the kitchen, her stunned silence followed me like a shadow. Part of me wondered if she really believed she could somehow smooth this all over, that I'd forgive her and we'd go back to pretending everything was fine. But she was delusional. She had shattered my trust, broken something that could never be repaired. And once trust is gone, there's no fixing it. Without another word, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her frozen in stunned silence. For a moment, I couldn't help but wonder if she actually believed this could be swept under the rug. Like I'd just wake up one day, forgive her, and pretend none of it had happened. But she was deluding herself. There wasn't a snowball's chance in hell of that happening. She'd shattered my trust, obliterated it in the most unforgivable way. And once trust is gone, it's gone for good. As I pulled into Thomas's driveway, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Beatrix. I confronted Rick. He tried to deny everything at first. But when I showed him the proof, he broke down and admitted it all. I'm filing for divorce. A grim satisfaction settled over me, like the final puzzle piece clicking into place. Rick and Ella had been so smug, so sure they could tiptoe around, sneak behind everyone's backs, and get away with it. They thought they could build some pathetic fantasy on the rubble of our lives. But now that little world was collapsing, and they had no one to blame but themselves. The days that followed were a blur of bitterness and fallout. I stayed at Thomas's, his place becoming something of a refuge, even if it didn't feel much like home. Thomas had always been there for me, though he'd never hidden the fact that he wasn't exactly Ella's biggest fan. For years, he'd kept his opinions to himself for my sake. But now he didn't hold back. I hate to say it, man, but you're better off without her, he said one night as we sat on his porch, beers in hand. I nodded silently, appreciating the sentiment, even if I still felt like I was living inside nightmare. Meanwhile, Ella wasn't ready to let go. She bombarded my phone with messages, calls, and voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. Terry, please, it was a mistake. I'll do anything to fix this. Don't throw away everything we've built. I love you. You're my husband, Terry. Don't do this to us. The same tired excuses and hollow apologies on repeat. But I didn't bite. I didn't even bother responding. Ella could send 1,000 messages, leave 100 voicemails, cry until she couldn't anymore. It wouldn't change a damn thing. She'd already made her choice the moment she betrayed me, and there was no coming back from that. Ignoring her was easy. What wasn't easy was shaking the weight of it all. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness that lingered like a fog I couldn't quite escape. Even as the days ticked by, I couldn't stop replaying it all in my head, like my mind was punishing me for ever trusting her in the first place. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. Not anymore. Ella had set fire to our marriage, and now she'd have to sit in the ashes. The only conversation that mattered now was the one happening in court. As for Rick, within 48 hours, his life began to unravel just as quickly as mine had. He was served with divorce papers and booted out of his own house. From what Beatrix told me, he tried to pull the same pathetic sob story on her that he'd used on me, about mistakes and regrets, about how it didn't mean anything. But Beatrix wasn't having it. She wasn't the type to be played or manipulated. Through the chaos, Beatrix and I stayed in contact. We weren't friends exactly. There was no coffee shop bonding or heart-to-hearts. But there was an understanding, a quiet solidarity that came from being betrayed in the same way. We shared updates, checked in occasionally, and offered each other a small measure of support. It was strange, but oddly comforting, to know I wasn't alone in the storm. Then came Friday. I got a text from Ella. Terry, I'm coming to pick up my things. Please be home so we can talk. I scoffed, shaking my head at my phone. Talk? There was nothing left to say. Still, I agreed to meet her, not because I wanted any kind of discussion, but because there was no way I'd let her go rifling through the house unsupervised. Trust was a luxury she'd obliterated, and I wasn't about to make this easy for her. When I pulled into the driveway that afternoon, I spotted her car already there, parked out front like she still belonged. Inside, I found her sitting on the couch, shoulders slumped, looking completely wrecked. It was obvious she hadn't slept or eaten much in days. Her face was pale, eyes swollen and red from endless crying. For a fleeting moment, a small ember of sympathy flared up inside me. But just as quickly it burned out. The memories of her betrayal hit me like a brick wall. She'd made her choices. Now she had to live with them. I walked up, leaned casually against the porch railing, and crossed my arms, keeping my expression unreadable. "You've got until tomorrow to grab your stuff and leave," I said flatly, wasting no time. She looked up at me, her face full of that same desperate, pleading expression I'd grown tired of seeing. "Terry, please, can we at least talk this through?" Her voice trembled like she was clinging to the last thread of hope. I let out a deep sigh, shaking my head. "What's left to talk about, Ella?" I asked, my tone cold and final. "You cheated. You lied. You destroyed everything we had. You've run out of chances. It's over." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, to plead her case one more time. But then she stopped, realizing, finally, that nothing she said would change my mind. She looked away, her shoulders slumping even more, as if the weight of it all had finally broken her. "I still love you," she whispered softly, almost like she was trying to convince herself of it more than me. A short, bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Yeah, well, I used to love you too," I said, my voice sharp but calm. "But that was before you decided Rick was worth more than everything we built. Before you chose to throw it all away for him." I paused, locking eyes with her. Now I don't feel anything at all." Her face crumbled, and for a split second, I saw the reality hit her like a punch to the gut. But I didn't care. She'd made her choice. And as far as I was concerned, this was just her living with the consequences. Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might beg again. One last desperate plea. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded, the fight gone from her completely. "Fine," she muttered quietly, the words dripping with defeat. "I'll pack my things." I watched as she disappeared into the house to start gathering her belongings, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a strange sense of relief. This is it, I thought. The end. As Ella moved through the house, packing her things, I stood there in the living room, watching her. She moved slowly, her body heavy, as though she were wading through quicksand. Each item she picked up seemed to weigh 100 pounds, and part of me wondered if she was finally realizing the depth of what she'd done. For a fleeting second, I thought I might feel sorry for her. Watching her drag herself through this self-inflicted mess, a shell of the woman she used to be, it should have stirred something in me. But it didn't. Not anymore. Not after everything. Hours passed, and when she finally carried her last bag to the car, the house felt lighter. Almost as if her presence had been a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me day by day. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. She paused by the front door, her bags already loaded, and I followed her out, stopping at the threshold. "Goodbye, Ella," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. She turned to look at me one last time, regret written all over her face. "Goodbye, Terry," she whispered, her voice trembling. And just like that, she climbed into her car, started the engine, and drove away. I stood there, watching as her taillights faded into the distance, leaving nothing but silence and an empty street behind. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange, bittersweet sense of freedom. The chapter was closed. She was gone. I could finally start to move on. Or so I thought. I lingered by the door for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me like a bomb. It was really over. That toxic weight of betrayal, of lies, it was finally behind me. I turned to head inside, ready to collapse onto the couch and let the exhaustion catch up to me. But as I stepped into the living room, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from Beatrix. "We need to talk. Call me when you can." My brow furrowed. Beatrix and I had stayed in touch, but this message felt different. There was an urgency in her words that made my stomach tighten. Without hesitation, I called her back, sinking into the chair as the line rang. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked as soon as she picked up, trying to keep my tone casual, though the tension was already rising in my chest. Beatrix's voice trembled. Heavy with emotion she was struggling to contain. "Terry, I just found something out about Rick," she said softly. "Something you really need to know." My heart dropped like a stone. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever twist was coming next. "Just hit me with it." She paused, taking a shaky breath before speaking. "Rick wasn't just involved with Ella. He's been seeing other women. Lots of them." I froze, my jaw clenching so tightly it hurt. "Wait, you're telling me Ella wasn't even his only affair?" I asked, my voice low and sharp, disbelief flooding me. "Not even close," Beatrix replied bitterly. "From what I can gather, Rick's been unfaithful for years. Ella was just one in a long line of flings. One of many." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of me. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what she just told me. Ella hadn't just wrecked our marriage for some fleeting romance or a man she thought she cared about. No, she had been just another face, another option in Rick's long-running parade of lies and betrayals. The anger came rushing back, hotter and sharper than before. She'd destroyed everything we built. For this? For a man who saw her as disposable, just another notch on his bedpost? It was pathetic. The whole situation was more pathetic than I could have ever imagined. "Thanks for telling me," I finally managed to say, my voice low, though my mind was still spinning. "Yeah," Beatrix replied quietly. "I figured you should know. You deserve to know." I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly, trying to push the rage down. It was over. The truth was out, all of it. And now, Ella was left with nothing but the wreckage of her own choices. "I guess this just proves they both deserve whatever's coming to them," I muttered. Beatrix let out a long, tired sigh. "Yeah, it's been rough. I'm filing for divorce, obviously, but honestly, still doesn't feel real. I can't believe this is my life now." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I get it, but you're doing the right thing. We both are. We're better off without them." She was quiet for a moment, as if turning those words over in her head. Then finally, she replied softly, "You're right. It's just hard to see that sometimes." "I know," I said, my voice steady but reassuring. "But we'll get through this. They're the ones who have to live with the fallout of their choices, not us." We talked for a while after that, our conversation equal parts disbelief and exhaustion. Two people wrecking not just one but two marriages for what? Something meaningless. A lie they tried to dress up as something more. It would have been almost laughable if either of us had been in the mood to laugh. When we were done talking, I sat there staring at my phone, still processing it all. The thought that Ella didn't even know about Rick's other affairs sat in the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. She wasn't special to him. She was just another name on his long list of conquests. A small part of me wanted to tell her, to confront her with that humiliating truth, to watch her face crumble as the reality hit. But another part of me didn't care anymore. She was no longer my problem. Days passed. Slowly but surely, I started to settle into a new routine. The house was quieter, cleaner, and most importantly, free of the suffocating tension that had hung over it like a storm cloud for months. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. Ella still sent the occasional text, pathetic pleas for another chance, but I ignored every single one. It was over. I closed that door, and I wasn't about to open it again. Peace, as fragile as it felt, had started to settle back into my life. Then, one evening, I got another surprise. A knock at the door. When I opened it, there stood Beatrix. She looked drained, as if the last few days had taken everything out of her. But then again, I probably didn't look much better. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. We sat in the living room, and for the first time in a long while we didn't talk about Ella or Rick. No drama, no betrayal. Just life. Where we were now. What came next. It was strange. Sitting across from someone who had been through the same storm, yet still feeling like strangers in some ways. But there was something comforting about it, too. We were both broken in similar ways, trying to figure out how to rebuild. After a while, Beatrix gave me a small, tired smile. "You know," she said, her voice soft but sure. "It's odd, but I feel like we're gonna be okay. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually." I nodded, a small spark of hope flickering inside me. "Yeah, we will." For the first time in a long while, I actually believed it. As we sat together in the stillness, the weight of everything slowly lifting, I realized something important. Betrayal can break you, can rip apart everything you thought you knew, leaving you raw and hollow. But it doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to be the end of your story. You can rebuild. You can pick up the shattered pieces, and if you're lucky, you might even find light in the darkest of places. Ella and Rick, they were just chapters in my life. Painful, messy chapters, sure. But now I was writing a new one, and that's my story. If you're going through something similar, if betrayal has blindsided you and torn your world apart, just know this. Life doesn't end after betrayal. You can survive it. You can move on.